Is he leaving?
No.
No, some place in town offered him free food for life.
Yeah, free wings for life.
Yeah. No, what I've read or heard, he's dug in. He
That's
is.
good.
Yeah, he's not leaving here. But then
In case you don't know what we're talking about, we have a coach here in Lubbock, Texas.
we are. Are we live now?
Yeah.
Oh my
Named
goodness.
Chris Beard,
Yes.
who we'd like to say if you're watching this.
Yes,
Chris
please
Beard.
stay. Please stay. Please share and like Chris Beard.
All right. Tonight's discussion is number 26, Images of the Desert Shepherd. There's going to be a few of these images of the desert going along. Tonight's is Shepherd. I guess it was supposed to be over the book of Numbers.
Yeah, but got to get some introduction before we get to the book.
I guess so.
Mhm.
I think that's what they thought.
I like how they went through Psalm 23. We'll get that
Yeah.
whenever we get there. And as soon as I heard him say that, I was like, oh man. Mark has been going through Psalm 23.
I have.
So, I like the quote he reads from Bruce Feiler. And he's talking about the desert in particular. And because the desert is demanding, it builds character. Because it's destructive, it builds interdependence. Because it's isolating, it builds communities. And because it's the desert, it builds nations. So
That's
it's
cool.
like, woo!
That was great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I listened to, this is off topic of this, but I listened to a current episode today, and he read a quote from a book that was good. I'll have to send that to y'all in the thing later. But he starts going through what desert means in Hebrew,
Mm-hmm.
and the word is midbar, and debar is word, and deber is to speak, and mudbear is shepherd, dobear is pasture, and devere is sheepfold. So it was just a lot of words that he was connecting to midbar. And he said, you go to the desert to learn how to speak and learn how to listen. And my first thought was, we go to the desert to learn how to listen to God and learn how to talk to God. That was my thought.
I agree.
What's up, James?
They all done about the same time.
Am I blocking you up?
No. We got a good amount of circular heads going.
Well, I think that in that, especially for people who haven't heard or read it, that in the Hebrew there are words and they become the root words for other words.
Mm-hmm.
And the word desert then also has all these other connections where and that the language is more visual.
Mm-hmm.
So there's pictures attached to the words. What he said
There's 8,000
8,000
words in biblical Hebrew versus 400,000 in English.
yeah. So we say a lot don't mean much.
Yeah.
No, true. Very true.
But they that one word that when then you go, okay, so what's the root of that? And then you start getting this visual image, and we need that as we study because we need to get our visual mind connected with our cognitive, to be able to see what's being said.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one of the important things in this study and in reading the Old Testament is to try to get that visualization of what's being talked about, because we hear it in English and we think English thoughts or Western thoughts, where we got to take a step back and realize that may not be. It's different than what we might think.
It's not written to the Western culture.
Yeah, there was another lesson. I don't remember if it was before or after this one. And he was talking about how in a Jewish setting in their worship, they wouldn't be opposed to imagery like
Right.
we are. Like we're real opposed to it. I don't know if it's because of Catholics or if it's just because of...
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think it's an anti-Catholicism stance that the Protestants did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's an idol.
I wish we brought them. I wish we had more imagery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a
And then over time, it just gets more focused. Protestantism, Reformation, Restoration. It just
Yeah.
more and
then it
more.
becomes more about this is what we like. This is holy. Really has more to do with my preference than what is holy, what is not holy. I just did a study in one of my classes. How even the cross became considered a symbol of demonic of the devil because it brings forth the image of the death, and it kind of went weird in the Protestantism when the idea of symbolism.
They were in their head too long.
But symbolism is a natural thing. I mean, when we say dog, you don't see the letters D-O-G in your head. You see 4 legs and a tail.
Mm-hmm.
So the imagery, I think, is a human thing, the way we do things.
And that helps us when we get here. We're talking about the desert. Without the imagery, it's hard to grasp what he's talking about.
Yeah, and some of the imagery we get, especially in Lubbock, is just a lot of flat nothingness. But the desert in Israel, or in that region, is more mountains and valleys, and seems pretty treacherous. Yeah. Like if you look at some of the pictures, there's just rocks and like that 27.
Big Bend area.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Some of the places look like what you've seen on movies.
Yeah.
Made me think. I wonder. I told Mary, I was like, you think this is what it looked like?
No, they used Big Ben in a lot of movies.
Yeah.
They did. Yeah. Spanglish was one.
Oh, in Spanglish.
We digress. Don't let us do that, Chris.
That just jumped right off.
Keep us on track.
There was no aggression in that. That was a jump off the cliff.
Everybody was nodding and then stopped.
It does remind me of a lot of places growing up in eastern New Mexico, right out towards the river, and there would be the wadis, the big canyons, the wash areas, and it would be really easy to get lost in just miles and miles and miles, especially going around the mesas and stuff, and you can get lost, and it's some pretty dangerous places. And then if you get a flash flood, it can kill you in a heartbeat.
Gone.
Yep.
Yeah. So some of the notes I took from while he was talking was the desert is a place for the shepherd. The desert is where the shepherd take the sheep to pasture because farmland is too precious and too scarce to have them graze on. So we have so much farmland here, it's hard to imagine that.
Right.
Not having it. They don't lead with a stick like Egypt and Pharaoh, but they're with their voice.
Wow, that was.
And so that whole part reminded me of back in Genesis, whose voice are you listening to?
Right.
And I started watching a video of some people who were trying to call the sheep in the pasture, and they're just like completely ignoring them. But then the guy comes up and starts yelling at them. They're all, and they all just run over there. And just like, man, like my thought to myself was, who am I listening to? Like on a daily basis, like who am I listening to? Am I listening to God or somebody else?
Right.
And they was saying how sheep only listen to their shepherd, and the stick is for defense or sometimes for walking. So he's not really using it to guide the sheep. He's just using it to protect himself or them.
But it also made me think of, in that context, do I respond to threat? That's the rod. Do you have to threaten me to make me behave?
Yeah.
Or do I respond to the shepherd? Because I hear his voice. And it made me really kind of have to step back and think a little bit, because often I have to be forced to be good. I have to, I grew up under the spare the rod, spoil the child mentality, and it was not spared in my house.
There was no spoiling, in other
It
words.
was liberal.
There was a liberal application of that text.
So there's a little bit of goat in all of us.
Yeah, that was the next thing I thought of.
Yeah, I thought of, it brought to my mind John 10:27, my sheep know my voice. It's kind of like, with kids, your kids know your voice, and you know your kid's voice, you know the different cries.
Right.
Yeah.
So it makes me think in the desert, when I'm in those places, I have to remind myself I know his voice, and I need to learn to differentiate the different voices. So in the quiet times and in my studies, one of the points of continuous prayer is to continue to learn what his voice is. And then I can respond automatically versus, okay, is this God or is this not God? So it's important, and in these desert places, to differentiate, know his voice.
Yeah. Is that voice leading you to water and pasture or to death?
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how he said if the shepherd dies, that the sheep are lost. If they don't pass on the voice. I was just like, again, like,
There's not the handoff, they'll die.
yeah,
no
sheep
one for them to listen
have
to.
no left or right. It's just
That's interesting.
I'm with you.
how does that happen? How do they trade that? How do they train that next shepherd so the sheep respond? That'd be
That's interesting.
But it made me think about, when you just said that, made me think about when Jesus died and how they all just
How they
like,
scattered.
you know, I'm going fishing.
Mm.
They went with him, go fishing, and the Spirit came. And so the new, I don't know if it was, I mean, Jesus was still with them, so they, you know. But
They gave him a new voice to listen to.
I don't know if you're going to talk about Psalm 23 later. Or
Yes.
not.
Yeah, it's next.
Okay.
You can see my notes.
No, I didn't see it. I just saw there's a red piece. I don't know what it's.
Oh yeah, that was my notes outside of Psalm 23.
Okay. I'll share it in a minute because I had something I thought about.
So I started questioning myself again. Who am I listening to? Do I listen to my shepherd? And then he pointed out how Moses was a shepherd, David was a shepherd, and then that's when he goes in Psalm 23.
Yeah.
Did you have something to say, Stephen?
No, I was going to say real quick, the idea of the John 10, the sheep know my voice, or a stranger they will not follow. As we as men, part of my men study, is that we have this natural place for leadership. And so part of what we do, whether in ministry, with family, disciples, is to help them learn his voice as well. I don't know if y'all saw a video I posted about father and son singing together. It's a beautiful little video. And it just made me think of all this as a shepherd. We as men are shepherds in our own right. So it's not just learning to follow God, but it's how to lead the way God leads.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So he starts going through Psalm 23, and he stops a few times, mostly in the beginning, but he goes through, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and then he stops.
Yeah.
And he talks about green pastures. They don't cover a big area. Most of it was, this is just enough for right now. I like how he said the desert is not a place of abundance, but a place of just enough. Because sometimes it feels like my life is just enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, that kind of is a wake up of, because of my vision or my idea of a pasture, it's huge and it's lush and the grass is steep and soft. But then, if I have to put it in that desert context of the East, there's nothing lush about it. And so when I'm in my desert, in my struggle, I want to know, how come it's not cushy? How come there's not abundance? How come there's not? And God's, I'm trying to help you see I'm enough. And I keep looking for something else, and God keeps saying, but I'm enough. And that's a big challenge a lot of times.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know it. My problem is I know it intellectually. There's nothing wrong with my cognitive knowledge. My heart doesn't listen.
Yeah. That's so true.
Right.
That's so true.
I'm trying to beat my heart into submission.
Yeah. I don't remember if it was something that I had heard along with this, because sometimes I get mixed up because I listen to all this, and so I'm like, was it this? Was it later? Was it something else? Or was it something else I read around this time? But just this idea of he's my shepherd, he leads me, it's interesting because he leads the sheep where they already want to go. He leads me where I already want to go. And so it's not, it's like the whole listening to his voice thing. It's a matter of trusting, is he taking me where, well, maybe not where I want to go. Sometimes places I want to go are not really where he's going to take me. But am I trusting that what he's telling me or what's going on is where I need to go? But I think about the sheep, and I was thinking about the sheep. This is kind of where I got this. Was the sheep, he leads me, this one says he lets me rest in green meadows, leads me beside peaceful streams, which meadows is probably a wrong word here. This is the New Living Translation, so it's probably not quite accurate.
It's more Western.
Yeah, but the streams of living water, the streams and all that, it's that's where they want to be. It's where they want to go. He's going to provide. But sometimes I think about this in terms of us listening, or me listening, was sometimes I go, oh, you see that over there? Ooh, that looks nice, and that's where I think I get off track. But that it really struck me that the sheep, part of the reason that they go where he says is because they know he's always taken me to the right place in the past. If he took them somewhere and there was like wolves, I don't know that they would keep following him. They'd probably be like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Last time we went,
shepherd.
there were 6 of us died.
Yeah.
You know, last time we went, it wasn't good, so they might be. But because they know he takes care of them, he was talking about the one where the sheep just went off the cliff. It's crazy. Like, they trusted so much in what he said. I mean, now they're sheep. I mean, I understand the analogy is probably a little over the top. But they trusted so much in him that they will just go wherever he says. It doesn't matter. So that's where I think the challenge lies sometimes, just trusting where he's leading is honestly where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not the way I think I want to go, but where in my heart of hearts, I want to go.
Good point.
Yeah, he was talking about how the desert teaches us how to be okay in the moment. I started thinking about Jesus whenever he got baptized and went to the desert and fasted for 40 days. He didn't have anything, but he was just being led.
Yeah.
Where to go. And then even at the end, Satan was like, he can give you some bread. He's like, I'm not going to live by bread alone. But it also made me think about Jesus telling us not to worry in his Sermon on the Mount, not to worry about tomorrow or what you're going to eat or what you're going to wear, because like the same thing was popping in my mind while I was listening to this. And if I'm with my shepherd, then I know I have enough for right now. And the desert is the perfect place for God to get Egypt out of his people. That's what made me think, like, what is my desert that's getting something out of me from my past? And then he goes on to, he leads me beside still waters. And he describes still water as just like a puddle left over from rain. A little later, I think he talks about living water. And living water is rain, water that has movement. So that's like water from God, because it's moving and it's living. But as soon as it's still, it's not living water anymore.
Right.
Which is funny. It's just, to us it's water, but to Israelite or a Jew, there's different meanings to it. But that little puddle of water is just enough, for the sheep that are drinking it. Might not be what they want to drink.
It might not be good for us, but it's good for them. It's what they need. Just what they need.
And he says, he restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, is like Ray was talking about earlier, if you get stuck there at nighttime, you're screwed. But he said the shepherd will get into the middle of the pack and let them surround him. So I guess they can get real close, so to listen to his voice or to protect him also. He says, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And he talked about how that was reminiscent of Abraham's hospitality in the desert. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Any other thoughts on Psalm 23? I know Mark has been reading it a lot.
One of the things I've been studying is contemplative prayer from the spiritual disciplines things. And so for the last 2 weeks, every day, and more than once a day, I've been quoting the Psalm and reflecting and trying to rest in the message. And I'm going to teach at our men's retreat some of the things I've been gaining from it. In a contemplative prayer, you're saying the same thing over and over again, but you are hearing each word different each time you do it. When you start, you say the Lord, and you have to stop. Okay, so who are we talking about here?
Yeah.
And he is. Not maybe, I wish he was, used to be, but he is my shepherd. There's a personal relationship. And if you take that one sentence and you say it several times and you think about each word and its significance, I think that's what gets down deeper into us and helps us to grow a little bit as we understand it. I had the coolest thing happen this weekend. We were with our family, all my grandkids, and we were for a wedding, but we all stayed in this one house, which was pretty cool. I gotta show you pictures.
Yeah.
Because it was a historic home.
Yeah.
Nice.
Huge home. And very, very cool. But one of my granddaughters is 13. She started studying the Bible.
Wow.
And so we had a quiet time together.
Nice.
And we talked about Psalm 23.
Mm.
And I got to share with her some things. And you can just see she's very smart. She has bigger words than I do. But, it's just, when you see people get it, that's so powerful. So powerful. And so I'm not going to tell you everything I'm thinking of now because I got to save it for the men's retreat. You got to come to the men's retreat if you want to. And I think it will be a time of incredible growth. Even that, you were saying that, well, God always takes me where I want to go. Well, he says he leads me in paths of righteousness, even for his name's sake. Even if I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, he's leading me, and I'm in the shadow of death.
Yeah.
But he prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies.
Yeah.
So there's all this conflict going on, but I'm safe,
Yeah.
and I'm secure, and I know that I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So there's there's so much. It ministers to your soul in such a great way. I'm so excited about it. You got a little smidget of what I want to do on our men's retreat. So it's good stuff.
That is good
Yeah,
stuff.
eating in the presence of your enemies is like you have enough safety to eat. I don't imagine this being like an eat when they leave Egypt and they're rushing. I got to hurry up and eat because my enemies are all around me. But it's just like God is like setting up this hedge around the dinner table. Your enemies aren't coming in. Sit down and eat together.
Yeah, I've always thought about that verse and I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, but that verse, even when I was young, I remember reading that, preparing a table in the presence of my enemies. I always thought of it more of like, my enemies are there, and God's like, Stephen's your enemy, and Stephen's right there, and God's like, here you go. Right in front of the enemies. He's like, have this food. Right? And the enemies, it's almost taunting them is the way I think of it. Taunting your enemies because he's giving you all the food in the presence of your enemies. That's just what it always made me think of.
Yeah, there's more.
Yeah, it just struck me that
Just a little tidbit. Talks about forgiveness. In the middle of your enemies, there's forgiveness, and you can forgive them. And because our enemies, we want to fight them.
Yeah.
That's not my feeling.
yeah.
Because I have enemies. I wish I didn't. But I have real enemies. And there are days I want to go over and punch them in the face. But I want to be at the place where I can sit down and have a meal. And that there's forgiveness. Even if it's only forgiveness from me. Whether they forgive me or not, but there's forgiveness from me. That's one of the things that I felt like God told me when I was going through this, is that how do I feel about my enemies? Do I want them at the table? There was somebody, and it was I forgot how they said it, but they said, just because I don't like you doesn't mean I don't want you to eat. I just don't want you at my table.
Right.
But if I'm with God, even if my enemies, I want them at the table. And Martin and I stayed up till 2 o'clock having a big discussion. And one of the things I came away with was that I don't hate people who hate me. I want them to come to the table. And if whatever I'm going through will help them come to the table, then so be it. If I have to walk through the valley of the shadow of the death for them to come to the table, then let's do that. And because I have security in God, they don't define me. They don't have any power over me.
Right.
Even though it feels like it. They don't count. God counts. but they're my enemies because they're hurt. There's something wrong with them. And how can we get them to the table? That's some of what I've learned.
Yeah, that's what struck me when he was talking about that. I thought about when Jacob and his uncle were eating, and they couldn't eat together unless there was some kind of resolution, and he had been chasing him down, and then they came to that resolution. They ate together, and he was talking about how in that culture you only eat together if you're okay. So I was just thinking about that when Roddy was talking about eating at the table with your enemy, and the enemy's at the table.
Yeah.
You're eating together because it's been resolved.
Yeah.
And so then you talked about it. I was like, man, that's
Yeah, that was my thinking.
so much more like God than
Me.
I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So the desert is where I'm going to learn how to listen and how to trust. And God will use the desert to train us to be people of the ears rather than people of the eyes. That even if we see danger, we listen to his voice and know that it's still going to be okay. And so that's where my question came in, is what desert has God brought you to, and what did you learn?
Wow, which one?
Yeah, the one I thought about, I think that struck me the most was when we had Maggie. And that's when I learned how selfish I was. Like, you already learn how selfish you are when you get married.
Yeah.
But then when another human being depends on you for everything, you really learn how selfish you are. And so Jessica and I had a hard 6 months, but we made it through it and came out the other side better off than we were before.
Yeah.
Any other
Sometimes I
deserts?
think I have a little bit of a hard time with that because you said that question. And I was thinking about it a lot today. Sometimes I have a tough time, maybe not with the question, but just the idea, because there's times that I feel like the desert that I've been in, my fault.
Self-inflicted desert.
Yes, self-inflicted desert.
You
God, I
wandered
don't
into
think
the
God
desert.
brought me to it. I just was like, I'm going to go that way,
I'm a goat and I want to.
Yeah. So I'm thinking,
Yeah.
but the times that I've gone through those, I think I've always learned, hopefully learned what not to do. But also in those situations learned a lot about God. Learned a lot about like what he's like and who he is and how he sees things. I think about some of the things. Well, one thing with our son that was several years ago, man, it was maybe the hardest time we ever had with him, like ever. I think he was a sophomore in high school, so like 5 years, something like that. But I just, some of it I didn't learn at the time. I think I learned it later. That the hard times that I saw, or even throughout his life, especially Tyler, I think, because he's a boy, so I think I relate more. But even through his life, when I would try to talk to him, and it kind of culminated later in the hard time, but he would just get distracted and kind of not really listen. And then when the really hard times came, he was just being defiant in what he wanted to do. And I think what I learned about God was, I'm a lot like my son to God, where either I'm not paying attention, or I get defiant, or I want to do my thing. And it's well intentioned, I don't hate him. I just want to do this thing. And but I just learned, I think I learned a lot about me and about God in that for me, I just want my son to do well. So I realized, what does God want? He just wants me to do well. And I just want my son to listen to me. And that's what God is. He just wants me to listen to him. And that's one of the things. Is I remember telling my son, listen, it's not hard, just pay attention. But then I started praying, I started realizing, dude, I'm like starting over every 5 minutes. Because I feel like I was like, oh God, I still have a lot to work on, but I learned a lot about God.
I hate those ADD prayers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not focused.
Right.
I need to
But,
remember who
yeah.
I'm talking to. Any other deserts? We can linger on this one because I don't have any more notes after this. It wasn't a long podcast.
There's several of them, I guess, and sometimes it was one desert into another desert. I guess the first one I can remember back just out of high school, I was rejected by all branches of the military. I remember the Navy guy said, don't do it. For the love of God, don't do it, was his response to me. And so it was like, what do I do out of this? And I was just learning to pray and seek God for direction. ended up leading me to the Bible school, which was a whole 2 years desert, learning to trust him, learning how to hear his voice, how to really hone this relationship. And then 10 years to achieve a 2-year college degree was a desert, because during those 10 years, man, I felt like I was spinning my wheels. But in that 10 years, I was involved a lot with youth ministry and all of those things and missions, but it was like learning to hear his voice, trust what he's saying to do, learn the idea of, is this God? Well, is it in your heart to do it? Then maybe it's God telling you to do it. So learning to hear his voice in those years, and even now I feel like I'm getting ready to go into another desert as I'm finishing school. And so it's like, where do I go? What do I do? But I've come to that point where I've learned trust. Chale. As God would say, chale. It means chill out and chill up. And so it's like, when it comes up,
I've never heard that.
Chale.
Like Hebrew. Is that Hebrew?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a Cholo term.
Chale Holmes.
Running all these words through my head.
That's
It's
funny.
a slang. And so it's like, I'm now come to the point where I've learned to hear his voice. The thing about learning to hear his voice, there's a commitment that I have to consciously make that I want to hear his voice. I mean, am I willing to risk walking off a cliff listening to him? Am I that committed? And so it's, that's part of the desert. You have to learn to survive in the desert. And the way that we survive is we learn to listen to his voice.
I feel like I've gone through many deserts. Sometimes I wonder if I ever get out. It's not like I get out and just go right back in. And,
That's where the food is, though, right?
but that's
According to
like
the shepherd leading us there.
over and over again. God keeps trying to tell me I'm enough. And personally, my character is I'm not enough.
Okay.
I'm never enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not. You name it, and I'm not. But I always wanted to be. I was never athletic. I was never this. I was never that. And I strive for things because I feel like I'm trying to make up for something I'm lacking. And God keeps trying to say, trust me. I'm enough. And one of the hardest deserts that I went through, and I even have to step back and try to figure out what did I learn, was when I was taken out of the ministry the first time. Because I had felt like, I gave you everything. I gave up everything. I am 110% in. I have no plan B. This is all I got.
Yeah.
Wow.
And just like that, it's gone.
Yeah.
And God said, yeah, well, we've decided you need to go get a job. You're not in the ministry anymore. See you later. Just like that, my whole life was gone. And Cindy came home, and I was under the desk in fetal position, crying. And I had thrown books and my sunset diploma and different things in the trash. And I was mad, and I was hurt. And then I thought, okay, I cannot fear what man does to me. We'll make it. And I'll be back. I'll be back in the ministry in no time. 10 years.
Right.
10 years. And I was cleaning houses and going to school and working as hard as I could in the ministry without being paid for it, doing everything. And I believe that God was trying to get me to trust Him and not trust my accomplishments and what I could do, because that's always the battle between what God can do and what I think I can do. That's why people are goats, because they think there's a better way. They think, oh, hey, God, I totally agree with you, but look over here, this is pretty cool. And I've had that prayer many times of, God, I know your will is, and I know this is what you want, but could you consider, maybe throwing me a bone over here? Can this happen? And just this total struggle. But I look back, and those were such formative days for my kids, and what they learned about my character. I'm over here screaming and struggling and hanging on for dear life, and they're over there going, man, Dad is a man of faith. He is stepping out. He's doing what has to be done. They didn't see what was going on inside me, and that was the formative years for them. And I've even gone back to them and apologized that it was so hard. We were on food stamps at one point. We were buying our clothes from the flea market, and it was hard. They got free lunch. I mean, it was hard times, and I've gone back and apologized for it being so hard. And they said, "Don't you ever apologize for that, because that's how we became who we are." When I went to nursing school, there were times when I couldn't work because school was so hard. And we had this janitorial business, and at night, my kids, they were sophomores and seniors, sophomore, junior, and senior. And at 9 o'clock, when I'm sitting there trying to study for a test, they were walking out the door to go clean offices. And they wouldn't be back until 12, 1 o'clock. And then they had to get up and go to school the next day.
Wow.
And I always felt horrible about that. But so that was a real desert time for us. Really, it was. And God kept saying, "I'm enough. I'll take care of you." And those 10 years, we never didn't pay rent. We never went hungry. One time we didn't even have a car because our car broke down, and I was like, "Now we'll be, And we're done. We get to these points. We're done. And a guy calls up and says, "Hey, bro, I got this old car. Could you guys use it?" And it was a crappy car, but it was a car.
Yeah.
And it got us down the road. And it was, and God just kept saying, "I've got you, and I will take care of you." And I think I fought him over and over again, and saying, I was like a kid saying, "You don't love me because you don't give me an Xbox."
Yeah.
And because you see my grandson saying that at his birthday, he got so mad because he didn't get an Xbox. He opened his presents and there was no Xbox, and he was mad.
Wow.
And nobody loves me. I didn't get an Xbox. And I thought, man, that's me.
Yeah.
I go to God and I'm so mad because I didn't get an Xbox. And he's like, "But look, I'm taking care of you."
Yeah.
And so I went from that desert and this, I feel like I'm in a desert right now of trying to ask, "Will you trust me in this? Will you trust me in this?" Because I get where I get a lot of my self-esteem from everybody else. What other people think about me and how do I look, and I start feeding off of what other people think, and I forget what God thinks, and then I put myself in another desert. I don't know if it's self-inflicted or God says, "Okay, get back over here in the desert so I can teach you some more things." So I love this concept, and it's hard. Deserts are hard. I grew up in a desert, around a desert, but I feel like we have to step back and see what's God doing here. Instead of, "God, why have you deserted me?" Find out, so what are you trying to teach me?
Yeah.
And that's one of the big conversations this morning I had was, so what is God trying to teach me right now? Because one of my biggest fears, because of this thing that's going on right now with enemies, was I was afraid my kids would think badly of me. because they're now adults,
They got minds.
and
Yeah.
to ask, so am I okay? I mean, when you look at me now that you know all this crap about me, am I okay?
Yeah.
Whew, that was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Wow.
And it's, you put it out there, and it's like, what if he says no?
Mm.
That's the biggest fear.
You know, what if he says,
Mm.
Dad, you disgust me.
Yeah.
I can't believe you would.
Hmm.
But that's not what he said.
Yeah.
and that's where my insecurities and my fears come in, is, am I going to believe that what God gives me, it's enough, and we're going to be okay? So I can go on and on for that.
Yeah, I was thinking while you were
Thanks for
talking
sharing
about
that,
that, how your kids are watching you go through that when they were younger, and it's like they were learning how to hear his voice.
Yeah.
They were learning just enough. You didn't feel like that because you were just struggling, but they were watching and saying, "I can
And
see
then I
him
can see it
listening."
in them,
Yeah,
in their life. I turn it around now. I see them and things that they're going through and what they're showing their kids. It's amazing.
yeah. One thing that struck me while you were talking about that was when you were asking if you were enough, and I was thinking how in the podcast he talked about how sheep produce wool and goats produce milk, and it's like that's what the shepherd needs. You know, he leads them to all these places, but he needs what they can give him, and we produce fruit for other people. You know, so that's what I was thinking. Like, you're enough because you're producing fruit. You don't feel like it because you're getting your wool shaved off.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know, but God's making something out of that, and it's just we don't see it. We don't think about it. We just. I don't
Maybe
know.
that's the biggest problem, is we're always trying to figure out how to get out of the desert
Yeah.
when they lived their whole life in the desert. And if their whole life was dependent upon God in every aspect, maybe the abundance and the overconsumption that we have should be, it is kind of what weighs us down more than anything else, instead of having full reliance, I guess is how you would say, because if you had to rely on God where the water was, whether you're going to have a crop, whether you're going to have milk, whether you're going to have wool, whether you're going to have, and you had to make the decision when things looked its hardest to know that God was going to pull you through it. Maybe the whole problem is we're not supposed to come out of the desert. Maybe our heart is always supposed to be that way, and then whatever else we have above and beyond that is what we should be sharing, so that we can be, in the next podcast will be Shade, how we can be a comfort to others by the extra we've been given. But I think we are so self-centered, so self-focused, so selfish in everything that we do that we don't even realize it. But maybe, and that's what's distracting us from really, maybe we're supposed to be in the desert the whole time. And, you know, we're always kind of thinking like the Israelites, they were in the desert for 40 years. And then God led them out to Israel, another desert. That's where they live.
That's where the kingdom is built. Builds nations.
Yeah. So, and where did Jesus go to be tempted for 40 days and 40? In the desert. But he lived in the desert. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of anything anywhere. It's just, you were just away from everybody else. And, you know, I can remember days going arrowhead hunting. We'd get there early in the morning, midday. I mean, you are feeling the heat. It's 110 degrees. We're walking up and down these washouts. We're walking up and down mesas. We've been covered in dust and dirt, and it's hot, and you barely have any water. There's times I've been so thirsty, I drank water out of a hoof print of a cow that was just water in the hoof print.
Wow.
I was
Hopefully.
dying of thirst. Yeah.
Sure.
So I survived.
Well, you're here today, so.
I'm here today. I've dug in the bottom of some of these canyons and dug holes and let it fill up with water to get a drink of water, because I'd be out of water and you're dying of thirst. There isn't any shade. And when it talks about shade and how much of a comfort it is, if you can get behind one of the canyon walls, or if you can get under a rock, you just have to compete with the rattlesnakes most of the time. But it's dangerous all wherever you go. Or it's like one of the biggest memories I have, me and my mom were walking in like one of these canyons, and you would have little spaces in the rock, you know, all over the place, and we're walking by and you hear that rattle like next to your face, and you see a 6-foot rattlesnake diamondback staring you in the eyes, you know, you're kind of backing up real slow. But that's why I always carried a stick. I always carried a walking stick and a knife. My dad always had his .22 pistol, but because then I could put the stick on the snake's head, cut this head of the rattlesnake off, scoop a little hole, bury the snake head so no one would step on it, and just keep going. And I killed probably 3 rattlesnakes a day every time we went out. But,
Crazy.
you know, so desert living is a whole different reliance, a whole different mentality. You know, maybe that's the thing is I've always been trying to get out of the desert. Maybe I'm supposed to stay there. Not that it's hard. Life is just hard in general. Sure. But it's my dependence on God and thinking about it that way, that, you know, God is giving me enough for everything that I need. Now how can I be enough for others?
Mm-hmm.
And stop trying to escape.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We try to get out of the desert. Well, maybe we need to stay.
Maybe this is
And
where
let
we're
God-
supposed to live.
Let God be enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Quit looking for something else.
Right.
Let God be enough.
Yeah, that when you said earlier, and we've talked about it I think in this group before about being enough. And when you were talking about it, I was just it made me wonder, what does that mean? Are we enough for whom?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I just wonder if God was like, you're enough for me,
Yeah.
but am I enough for you? And I was so convicted when I thought that, like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness. Because most of the time, if I was honest, the answer would be no.
Right.
He's
The
not
issue is not, am I enough?
Yeah.
God's asking, but am I enough?
Right.
You know?
And we're,
Do
for
you
me, a lot of
trust
times, because you're talking about your kids, and it's so funny because you mentioned that, because I've thought that recently where I don't ever have a thought, oh, does my daughter like me? Does she, you know, I don't, but I feel that way where, you know, she'll say things like, it's kind of like, Dad, you know, you're stupid. Kind of, you know, how we all probably were with our parents, right?
Yeah.
But but having that sort of insecurity, and it kind of upsets me. I'm like, I don't even feel like that with her. Is she okay with me? Is she enough for, you know? But I was thinking about it, and just actually this morning I was thinking about just sort of that whole concept, and I thought, shouldn't matter, right? Because what I start doing, or my wife, or people in the church, or anything, and I wonder though if it's like me telling God, yeah, but Chris, you know, but to these guys, he's like, and we're like, yeah, I know you're, and kind of like probably my daughter says that. Sometimes I tell her she looks, you know, pretty or whatever. She's like, yeah, you're my dad, you have to say that, you know. And I wonder if that's because I'm thinking if I was God, or if my daughter, if I was like, listen, you are awesome, I love you so much. She's like, yeah, but my friends don't like me. It's almost like, yeah, it doesn't matter what you think. And I'm like, I hope I don't make God feel that way, because that would tick me off. Thank God that he's not like me. Because I'd be like, you know what? Fine. Let your friends take care of you. That's how I would be.
Right.
I would be like, you know, I mean, for a few minutes, then I'd be like, I can't be that way.
Yeah.
But I'm thankful God's not like me, because I can be a little vengeful sometimes.
I think one of the hardest deserts I've ever gone through is realizing I never liked me. I never liked myself. I never was good enough. Like Mark was telling me, I was hateful to myself. And all the hateful thoughts, always trying to tear myself down to try to motivate myself. And one of the things that I have kind of learned over the last couple of years was to stop doing that. In order to stop doing that, I had to look and kind of imagine in my mind if I were talking to my child and they came to me and they were saying they were hurting, or they were, you know, someone didn't like them at school, how would I comfort them? How would I encourage them? How would I validate their feelings? Well, when God says, love your neighbor as yourself, the expectation is that you should love yourself. Well, I didn't know how to do that. So I always hated myself. hateful to myself, and when I had to make a decision to start loving myself the way God wanted me to love me, I look at myself as the little child. How do I comfort me? How do I parent me? How do I encourage the inner self the way God wanted me to look at myself, not being hateful and mean to myself? That's not what God wanted. He just constantly looked at me and was trying to comfort me and love me and encourage me. But if I'm constantly tearing myself down, then if I can't even like me, how am I going to like anybody else? How am I going to love anybody else? Truly love them if I don't have that from inside out. And so I had to start looking at myself as, if I were talking to my child, how would I talk to them? How would I encourage them? How would I love them? That changed the whole ballgame. That was kind of a mind wake up for me. And it's getting to the point now when I'm not thinking about constantly what other people think of me. It's turning that off when or like, if I start having those thoughts, I wonder what they think about me, or are they gonna like, doesn't matter. They probably aren't even thinking about it. They got a million other things.
Thinking about themselves.
They're thinking about it. If they like me, they like me. And if they don't, that's okay. That's their opinion. That's their choice.
Right.
That's their right. If they don't. But it doesn't mean that it negates my obligation to love them, even if they're hateful towards me. I still, like the patient that was just absolutely rude, hateful, and mean constantly to me, I still have to choose to love him, even when he's being hateful to me. But I don't have to let him in that little bubble. I don't have to let him in the door and hurt me in that way. I can say, that's his choice. You know, that's his opinion. That's how he lives his life. That's okay. But I'm okay.
Yeah.
And that's where I had to get to be, is where if I'm okay, then I'm gonna be okay with other people, no matter what they do.
Yeah.
That was interesting how, well, it was interesting, it was more funny than interesting to me, but how the sheep eat the grass and the goats eat everything else.
Right.
You know, so it was like they kind of fit together as this puzzle, going through the desert, providing, you know, wool for the shepherd and milk for the shepherd, and they eat the grass and they eat everything else. I just thought that was funny. But the sheep follow and trust their shepherd, and the goats know a better way. Mark kind of touched on that, being a goat and knowing a better way. And so I asked myself, am I a sheep or am I a goat? Like, do I listen to God or do I know a better way?
Yeah.
Right.
That was challenging because they're going the same direction. They're all headed in the same direction. But the goat's doing whatever he wants to do. And then the passage where Jesus talks about it, he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. And they're going to be people who will stand before God and saying, but Lord, I prophesied in your name.
Right. Right.
I did miracles in your name. And he'll say, depart from me, for I never knew you, because you were a goat.
And you never listen to me.
You know, you never listened
And
to
the
me.
sheep are going, that's a bad idea.
It was all about you. And so that, I think that's super challenging for us to consider, you know, is it about me? Is it, because I can get all in myself and in my head and be weird as everything, and thinking that, you know, it would be great if God just did this. And I got my own goat path, and it's not the path of righteousness. It's my own little, I'm over here on the rocks or doing something else. And so I think there's a lot of challenge in that, to really look at, am I listening to his voice, or am I telling him, God, you need to fix this.
Yeah.
You need to do this, and you need to do this, because this is the way it should be over here. I got my own, you know, going across these rocks is really cool. I don't want to go down that path of righteousness. And I feel like there's so much there that's a big challenge for us to always be considering.
Yeah.
One thing that, you got anything to share?
No, I was just thinking about what he was talking about with the sheep and the goats, and I had a thought about knowing his voice, and it was all just kind of jumbled in there together. But I was thinking about I forget what he said about the sheep hear his voice, the goats. He said something about the goats in there. I can't remember what it was, but I was just thinking about how we are, and how I think about my years as a follower of Jesus, and how many times where
I think he said the ghosts just go along with the crowd.
they just go on the crowd. Yeah, that's what he said. And how there's so many times that I've been around. I'm at church. I'm at everything. I'm not out, doing my own thing necessarily. I'm at church, but I'm just sort of going along. I'm not really necessarily listening to Jesus and following Jesus. It becomes about church more than about. So I got to think about that more, but that's just a thought that popped up.
Just to go.
And I think I can even do that now, leading the church. Thinking about leading the church, like it's about this is what we need to do. And these are all instead of going, God, we're trying to be led by the Spirit, trying to be and not in some weird mystical way, but just really seriously, what it's got like that scripture in Acts. I think we were talking about in Big Bend how the Holy Spirit said this and it seemed good to us. That scripture where I forget what it was, but what they were talking about. But they said it also seemed good to us that we should do this. I think it was the Jerusalem Council. Yeah, they were talking about that.
Right.
I think
it's strange that they got a vote.
Yeah, it sounded good to us too. So, but I think just us getting to where I'm listening more to Him and really spending time praying and slowing down sometimes to hear His voice, because I think sometimes and that's a difficult thing. Like, what does that mean to hear His voice? Because there's times I hear this small still voice and I'm like, that probably wasn't. I don't think that was Jesus. Because sometimes a small voice is like, oh, that's not biblical. The thing you're thinking, that's not God. So I think that's the challenge, is to be able to slow down and like be immersed enough. Because I was thinking about sheep, right, and how sheep hear His voice, and likely those sheep were born in that group. So from the time they're born till they're older, they've always heard His voice, and they learn this is where we're going. This is where we're going. But I think sometimes to change the analogy to people is slowing down enough to listen and spend time in Scripture and really like what I've been really thinking a lot about what you've been talking about the whole
Contemplative prayer.
I can never think of that word. Contemplative prayer. And so there's scriptures I've been trying to do that with intentionally to go, what does that mean? What does that word mean? And it's helpful just because it's like filling me with that scripture, right? And so as I go, something happens and it's like the voice saying, remember? So that, I don't know. I think that's something I want to spend more time with.
I think that's a big point about how to be a sheep versus how to be a goat.
Yeah.
And
that'd be a good sermon.
And one of the things is we have to learn how to rest. We've done all this talk about rest and here and there, right. But we read. We have quiet time. Quiet time is read, reflect, respond. That's our go-to. But there's a fourth R, and it's rest. Allowing what we're reading to go over and through us, because honestly, I can have a quiet time. And you asked me 30 minutes later what it was about, and I had no clue.
Right.
Because I checked it off because I did it, but I had no clue because I didn't allow it to rest. We're so much in a hurry to get to the next thing.
Yep. Always.
With the goat, just
always
we're hopping along trying to get to the next thing, and we haven't let that soak in. And that I got to do that with my granddaughter. It was so cool to help her, because she's very academic, very smart, and she's doing word study now, and she's got this list of all who God is, and she's just she's in a hurry to find it all.
Yeah.
And we just talked about, but what does that mean? You read here that you said God is all. You wrote that down. That's on your list. What does that mean? We can stop right there and think about that. Don't go to the next thing because you haven't learned this thing. And there's a thing in reading that if you read a word you don't know, but you keep reading, all comprehension ends. Because your brain got stuck up here on that word you didn't know.
It's a conflict.
You're reading along, you come across a word you don't know, and you kind of skip it and keep going. Your brain's going, but what does that mean? And everything else you read you don't know it. You totally lose it. You have to go back and go, okay, I don't know what that word is. I need to know what that word is so I can read the rest of it and have some kind of comprehension.
Yeah.
That's cool.
One
Good
thing
stuff.
that stuck out to me at the end is when he started talking about how shepherds in their culture were almost exclusive to women.
Yeah, that's strange. I never thought of that
And-
at all.
Yeah.
And it made me think
Not
of
movies,
the scene in Trinity in
Nativity.
the Matrix
Oh,
when Neo meets Trinity for the first time. He's like, "I thought you were a guy," and she said, "Most guys do."
most.
I'm like, "Yeah." So I think it's just because I'm a guy. I assume all shepherds are guys, but
When it's what we see.
Yeah, because we
Yeah.
saw David was a shepherd, Moses was a shepherd,
Mhm.
they're guys.
Yeah.
Now they say that is maybe
Yeah.
an exception, not the rule.
mhm.
Well, he said that they would have probably been an overseer rather than an actual participant in what was going on, which makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting because I always thought of shepherds like back home with shrimpers. Shrimpers were not; they were the low life. You know, they spend all their money on fast women, and fast times. So when I think about shepherds in that aspect, I think of that lifestyle. So when they said it was women, well then that kind of changes that narrative for me.
Wow.
You know, so it's really had nothing to do with, or it could have been maybe they really were just that low on the totem pole that they were humbled into those positions.
Right.
You know.
David and Moses.
Yeah.
Well, because you think about Moses was running away. It was like,
Yeah, they talk about that.
And
Almost
David
like the
being
prodigal son.
youngest- Yeah, and then David being the youngest of his brothers,
Mhm.
he's probably just a young boy,
Yeah,
not
but
probably much older than Garen.
Yeah.
And your dad's like, you're gonna get out there and work, and you go out there and work with your sister. You're gonna work them, you know, work the sheep and everything else.
That's
make
where
sure
you
they
learn
get
to throw
fed
that
and
sling.
watered, and
Yeah.
you know, it's just part of.
It makes me
work.
rethink though the nativity
Yeah.
with the shepherds who heard
Yeah.
yeah.
Jesus sing and they came to see. That just kind of
Yeah.
makes me re-see that all over again.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's cool.
But
So they would have been really, really low if they were guys, shepherds out in the field. So
In the
they
middle
were
of the
like,
night.
But I wonder though, do you hear stuff like this? Because I think like this. If I hear these guys say women are usually shepherds, and everyone was in here, that's news.
Mm-hmm.
None of us were like, yeah, I know that, right? We're like, yeah.
Jay
All
was
of us.
Yeah, I think
So-
it deserves further.
So part of me
study.
goes,
Yeah.
8 of us in here had never heard that. So is it
Maybe
It's
we should
questionable.
look at it.
is that accurate? Or it could be, is it in this area? Yeah, there were mostly women in this area, because I'm thinking, how did all society get that wrong
Yeah.
for thousands of years?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Schism.
If you
I mean, he
think
grew a
about
big
it,
piece of land.
you know,
So-
Most
shepherds.
folks thought it was pasture too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shepherds
Yes.
in the in the west in the Eastern culture, and then you fast forward, you know, to the 1800s, the cowboys.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and
That's what we think of.
they were,
The West.
you know, shepherds. They were herders, but they were herding cattle. You know, and you know, and that's a, you know, that's a man. That's a
Tough gig.
that's a real man's work there.
It was probably at some point in time everyone's job. From when they were young, they were required to do it, so they knew how to do it. Their daughters would go out there and do it. You know, they'd be gathering the water, watering the animals, and so would the young boys. And then once they started learning their trade, like having to go plow the field, or how to build a house, or you know, then the younger kids would take over that part of it. But they probably all took their turns learning how to shepherd and take care of the flock, because that's their life.
Right.
Without that, they ain't got.
And it
They're
could have
dead
just
in
been
water.
girls because of proportion of girls to boys.
Yeah, I had a realization that nobody picked up on. Thank goodness. But so he was talking about how it was mostly exclusive to women, but he also mentioned that a patriarch or another man would protect the woman while she's shepherding. So it made me think Moses and David were shepherds. God was protecting them. This is the established order because the man is the head and the woman is the one taking care of the sheep. God is the head, Moses is taking care of the sheep. God is the head, David's taking care of the sheep.
Right.
Israel. You know, so that's I wondered if it was one of those correlations, like how it's always God is our husband, we're the bride, you know?
Yeah.
And then Saul was king, and he was head over the donkeys.
So God doesn't want to be
Yeah.
over the
donkey
donkeys.
herd.
That was the last part of the podcast, and I thought it was a pretty cool.
Genesis 29 said Rachel was a shepherd.
Interesting.
Rachel came with her father's sheep.
I was reason I think it's probably
Zipporah was also shepherd Moses' wife. That may be how he got to hang out with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and to fill the troughs to feed the father's flocks. So it's just something we haven't really.
Haven't really thought. Yeah.
Interesting.
Our male ideas haven't.
Just sexist pigs.
Yep.
We're just sexist
That too.
pigs.
That too. Guilty.
That's something that dawned on me this morning. That's like, just because they say something on the podcast doesn't mean that it's right.
right.
Yeah.
And they
I was
tell
like, I gotta
you.
be careful with that because I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, they know.
Right.
I go,
How do we know? How
Not
do we know?
everything they've said
yeah,
do we agree with.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Nor do
they
we
tell
have
you
to.
that. Wrestle with it. Go figure it out. Go
That's
find
right.
out. Maybe.
And that's probably the point, right?
And
One
he
of
does.
us is wrong.
He does. You know, the cool thing about it, he does do a lot of podcasts, or I mean, the YouTube videos as follow-ups for these episodes. When he finds out something that information that he gave is wrong, he will come in and apologize and say, "Hey, we went and researched it. I got input from other people. This was wrong," and he'll say, "You know, hey, I was absolutely wrong,
Yeah.
and I learned from this, or I offended this group of people, you know, and I don't want to be like that, you know." So he's worked very hard to be humble through it all, and he can't go and like redo the episode per se.
Right.
So he does these supplements on YouTube and saying, "Hey, I screwed up."
Yeah, no,
That's wrong.
that's awesome. I can't tell you how many times when I'm working on a sermon and there's a thought that I had and I go, "Is that right?" And I keep looking at it. No. Surely it's okay. No. Oh, well.
Scratch that.
That's that.
If I'm gonna say
I
it
look
anyway.
hard though. I'm like, surely this is
I
not
need to find
completely
another
wrong.
verse to support my point.
Yeah.
We were talking
But
about
some of the stuff that I've heard different places, and I go, I've always heard that, but let me and start looking at it. And
My
go,
favorite preacher
That doesn't
said
make
this, so he's always right. So
Yeah.
it has to be true.
Join us next week for our discussion over episode 27, and like and share.